Hey, Jim Stroud here with a question. Why did slavery end in America? Now, I always thought it went something like this. Northern states said to the southern states, "Hey, slavery is evil. Stop that." Southern states would reply, "Them is fighting words, sir. Y'all mind your own business or we starting our own country." And the northern states would say, "I think not." There was a big debate, followed by an even bigger war, Abraham Lincoln, and before you know it, all the slaves are free. Okay, so that was a huge oversimplification of things, but nonetheless true for the most part. Oh, but there is more to the story. If you ask 10 historians why slavery ended in America, you'll likely get 10 different answers. As I researched the topic, here are some of the responses that I heard more often than not. Some Northerners saw slavery as unfair competition for jobs. If you are a free white man and you did the same type of work that slaves did, well, your wages will be very, very low because the value of work was so devalued because people just have slaves do it. Northerners thought that slave labor gave the South an unfair business advantage. Northern whites thought that the slave labor gave the southern states too much of a political advantage. This is why. There was something called the 3/5 Compromise of the Constitution. And what that meant was that states could count 3/5 of a state's slave population when determining representation in Congress. And because there were so many slaves in the South, that 3/5 rule gave the South considerable political influence. Some historians chalk it all up to cultural differences. The South adhered to an older British gentry model with estates and servants and dependence on agriculture. To expand their influence, the South energetically tried to colonize new states so that they would become slave states with their same culture. The North, by contrast, was unsympathetic, to say the least, to the South's model and saw the U.S. territories as places for free men to set up farms and be entrepreneurs and such. If the Southern planters got those states, the North felt that the little guy would be squeezed out or made to be a servant to the fat cat Southern plantation owners. Some historians believe that slavery ended just because of fear. News about the Haitian Revolution, the Gullah Wars, the Amistad Mutiny, the Denmark-Vesey conspiracy, and several other accounts of slave uprisings has slave owners sleeping with one eye open. There is one theory, however, I had never heard of. I certainly did not hear about this in school. And when I stumbled across it in my research, my mind was quite literally blown. Rather than just give you the short answer, let me build up to it. Now, except for the small number of Northern whites who were abolitionists at the time, most people in the North weren't really concerned about ending slavery. They were mostly concerned about it not expanding to their territory. Now, a few things changed the attitudes of Northern whites from not wanting slavery to expand to eradicating it altogether. One of those things was this right here, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Senator Stephen Douglas introduced a bill that divided the land west of Missouri into two territories, Kansas and Nebraska. He argued for popular sovereignty, which would allow the settlers of the new territories to decide if slavery would be legal there. Anti-slavery supporters were outraged because under the terms of the Missouri Compromise of 1820, slavery would have been outlawed in both territories. After months of debate, the Kansas-Nebraska Act passed on May 30th, 1854. Now, pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers rushed to Kansas, each side hoping to determine the results of the first election held after the law went into effect. The conflict turned violent, aggravating the split between North and South until reconciliation was virtually impossible. Opponents of the Kansas-Nebraska Act helped found the Republican Party, by the way, which opposed the spread of slavery into the territories. As a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the United States moved closer to civil war. And then there was the Dred Scott decision of 1857. U.S. Supreme Court in 1857 declared all congressional regulation of slavery in the territories to be unconstitutional and raised the possibility that slave owners could even move north with their slaves and keep them if they wanted. Okay, now comes the mind-blowing stuff. During the time period of slavery in America, the white slave owners would have sex with their female slaves a lot. A lot. Polite society would classify these children in a number of ways. Mulatto, meaning one pure, in quotes, black parent and one pure white parent, or person whose parents are both mulatto. Quadroon, one black grandparent and 3 white grandparents. Then there were other designations such as octoroon, which meant that you were 1/8 black, or hexadecaroon, which meant you were 1/16 black. Now, whether you were mulatto, octoroon, quadroon, hexadecaroon, or anything, in the South, you were black, because there was a rule that said if there was just one drop of black blood in you, then you were black. Case closed. Now, how do I say this next part? It's always been my understanding that when the white abolitionists of the North became aware of how the African slaves were being treated in the South, that they were justifiably outraged, and with every bit of humanity or decency or Christian fortitude, they fought to end the evils of slavery. And that is certainly true. That is definitely true. But it's not the whole truth. If your mother was a slave, then you were a slave, no matter how much you look like your white father. Some historians assert that while freeing black slaves was of keen interest, the major motivation was seeing white-looking slaves working alongside dark-skinned slaves on a plantation and being treated the same way. Abolitionists, for better or worse, I would say better, used the evidence of white-looking slaves to sow distrust in the North against the southern states in general and against southern plantation owners specifically. It was also speculated that many whites in the North did not want slavery to come into their territory because they were afraid that they could be mistaken as a mulatto or quadroon or an octoroon and be taken against their will into slavery. Prove it! Now, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so let me share with you a few photos that I found online. Actually, I found these in connection with this article right here. Let me read a couple of lines from this article as you absorb these pictures that are on the screen. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, when 8 former slaves aimed to drum up support for struggling African-American schools in the 1860s, they believed they had just the thing. In order to garner sympathy and funds from rich Northerners as they toured the country, organizers from New Orleans portrayed the slaves as white for a propaganda campaign, using 4 children with mixed race ancestry and pale complexions. They believed the white faces of Charles Taylor, Rebecca Huger, Rosina Downs, and Augusta Bruhe would encourage donors to sympathize with the plight of recently emancipated slaves and give more generously. Let me scroll through here a little bit further. One of the, quote, white children, 11-year-old Rebecca Huger, had been a slave in her father's house. To all appearance, she is perfectly white, the publication writes. Augusta Bruhe, 9, was also owned by a family member, her half-brother, and was born to a woman who was, quote, almost white. Are you surprised? Now, as surprised as you might be right now, there were people in that time period who were equally as shocked. Check out this book here. This book here is called The Forgotten Cause of the Civil War by Lawrence Tenzer. Now, in this book, the author, Tenzer, cites several historical accounts of white society reacting to white-looking slaves in the South. And here are a few quotes from his book. Check these out. In Lexington, Kentucky, Reverend Calvin Fairbank described a woman who was going to be sold at a slave auction as one of the most beautiful and exquisite young girls one could expect to find in freedom or slavery, being only 1/64th African. Many other accounts were published all through the period before the Civil War, in which travelers and visitors to the South made note of the white slaves they saw on plantations and at slave auctions. Their expectation, of course, was to see slaves who were black or brown. On seeing white slaves for the first time, they often expressed surprise at how white those slaves really were. Another 18th century traveler was Jacques-Pierre Brissot de Warville, a Frenchman who came to America in 1788. While visiting a school for Negro children in Philadelphia, he saw, quote, an octoroon whom it was impossible to tell from a white boy, end quote. While at a public house in Fredericton, Maryland, there came a decently dressed white man of quite a light complexion in company with one who was totally black. After they went away, the landlord observed that the white man was a slave. I asked him with some surprise how that could be possible, to which he replied that he was a descendant by female ancestry of an African slave. He also stated that not far from Fredericktown, there was a slave estate on which there were several white females of as fair and elegant appearance as white ladies in general, held in legal bondage as slaves. Traveling the United States about the same time as Bremer was an Englishman named Edward Sullivan. As a foreign visitor in the South, Sullivan was uncomfortable with slavery not being based on color. Quote, I have seen slaves, men and women, sold at New Orleans who were very nearly as white as myself. Although it is not actually worse to buy or sell a man or woman who is nearly white than it is to sell one some shades darker, yet there is something in it more revolting to one's feelings. During 1855 and 1856, the American Anti-Slavery Society published a series of pamphlets, one of which was entitled White Slavery in the United States. 3 of its 8 pages list newspaper notices for white runaway slaves. The suppressed book about slavery, written by George Washington Carleton in 1857, also contains many such advertisements. The Chicago Daily Tribune, a popular newspaper, had an interesting article entitled A White Slave in an 1856 issue. A white female slave had escaped from Missouri and was given refuge by 2 Germans in Illinois. Slave catchers captured the girl and arrested the Germans despite their claim that they thought her to be free because she was white. One German escaped, the other was jailed. Quoting from the Quincy Republican, the newspaper which first reported the story, the Tribune declared, "You see the legitimate, the unavoidable fruits of the slave system in our sister state. Do you wish to incur for yourselves or your friends in the territory the penalty of 5 years imprisonment in the penitentiary for the extraordinary crime of being unable to distinguish between a white free woman and a white slave?" So why did slavery end in America? Well, that's a topic that historians are debating even to this day. But among those many debates should be the very real fear that Northern whites had at the time, that if slavery were to continue, then there was a possibility that they could be mistaken for an octoroon, a quadroon, or mulatto, and taken into enslavement. Well, that's it for my Black History special, Slavery in America. What did you think? I would love to hear from you. If you would, please leave a comment and let me know. I don't normally do historical stuff like this, but who knows? Depending on how people react, maybe I'll do more. If you have not already, please subscribe to my blog over at jimstroud.com. I would love to see you there. I'd love to have you be a regular reader of my blog. It would mean so much to me. Oh, one more thing before I go. Check out this book. Yeah, this book here. The Two Lives of Sally Miller, a case of mistaken racial identity in Antebellum, New Orleans. You find this whole white slavery in America thing fascinating. You definitely want to check out this book. It's a true story about a Louisiana Supreme Court case of Sally Miller versus Lewis Belmonte, which was seen at the time as a shocking tale of a white woman trapped in slavery fighting for her freedom. So, true account of a real life court case. Very fascinating read. Check it out. Let me know what you think of that as well. All right. Okay, about to go. I am going. I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks again for watching this video. Please share it and please subscribe. And yeah, until then, bye-bye.